It was 7:48 on a Monday morning when Cole Whitaker's phone buzzed against the edge of his saw bench. He was mid-cut, a 12-foot plank of white oak trembling under the blade, sawdust rising in a pale cloud around his forearms. He let the saw finish before he picked up. The voice was calm, the way school secretaries train themselves to be calm. "Mr. Whitaker, Macy has been asked to remain at the office. There are some serious concerns." He did not change his clothes. He did not wash the sawdust from his hands. He locked the job site, got in his truck, and drove. Macy was sitting in the chair nearest the window when he arrived. Her backpack was on her lap, both arms wrapped around it the way a younger child holds something precious. Her eyes were dry but red at the corners, the kind of red that comes not from crying but from fighting the urge to cry for a long time. On the small table in front of her, 2 documents had been placed side by side. One was her score sheet from the County Math Invitational. The number 98 was printed in the upper right corner, circled in red ink by someone who intended it to look suspicious. The second was a printed form that read, across the top in capital letters, "Referred for Academic Dishonesty Review." Cole looked at his daughter. He looked at the papers. He pulled the empty chair beside hers, sat down, and put his hand on her shoulder. He did not say it will be fine. He did not say don't worry. He said nothing at all, but his hand stayed there, heavy and certain, and Macy let out a breath she had been holding since before he walked through the door. The meeting with Dr. Nora Ellison took place 20 minutes later in the principal's office at the end of the hallway. Nora was 35, new to Daler Creek High, having come down from Nashville 8 months earlier, with a leather portfolio full of reform ideas and a quiet belief that small schools were where real change happened. She was precise in her speech and careful in her posture, the kind of person who had learned early that being a woman in institutional leadership meant you could not afford to seem uncertain even when you were. Nora laid out the facts without drama. Macy Whitaker, age 14, 9th grade, had submitted a score of 98 out of 100 in the County Math Invitational, held 3 weeks prior the highest score in the county. It exceeded the previous top score, belonging to a junior named Brandon Fenn, who had placed first in the same competition for 2 consecutive years and had scored 92 this cycle. The County Review Committee had flagged the result as a statistical anomaly. In addition, the proofwriting section of Macy's exam, the portion requiring students to show their reasoning step by step, had been characterized as unusually sophisticated relative to her prior academic record. The committee noted that her methods bore no resemblance to anything taught in Daler Creek's 9th grade curriculum, which they considered relevant. And 48 hours after results were published, Gerald Fenn, Brandon's father and chairman of the school's parent association, had filed a formal complaint with the district office. Cole sat with his hands folded on his knees. He waited until Nora finished. He glanced once at Macy, who was looking at the far wall with her jaw set in a way that reminded him, painfully, of her mother. Then he asked, in a voice entirely level, what the actual evidence of cheating was. There was a shift in the air between them, small but perceptible. Nora said that a formal complaint had been filed by a stakeholder of standing, and that the committee was obligated to open a review. Cole said, "I understand the process. I'm asking about the evidence." The silence that followed was brief. Nora said, "There is no direct evidence of misconduct at this time." Cole nodded once, slowly. She could see that he understood exactly what she had just admitted, and that he was going to remember it. She leaned forward slightly and lowered her voice half a register below the administrative register she had been using. "Mr. Whitaker, I need you to know that I have not reached any conclusion, but I am required to open the review process. I don't have the discretion to decline a formal complaint from a stakeholder of this standing." Cole looked through the glass panel at Macy, who was sitting in the waiting area with her hands wrapped around her water bottle, turning it slowly. He looked back at Nora. "How long does the review take?" 3 weeks, Nora said. Cole was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands. 3 weeks is a long time for a 14-year-old, he said. Nora said nothing. But she did not look away. She had sat across from a great many parents in difficult conversations, and she knew the difference between a parent who was going to make this harder and a parent who was going to make this more honest. Cole Whitaker, she was already certain, was the second kind. They found Cole in the hallway before he reached the exit. Lou Harwick was 61 years old and had been teaching mathematics at Daler Creek High for going on 27 years. He walked with the unhurried authority of a man who had long since stopped worrying about being overheard, but he kept his voice low all the same. "Cole Whitaker," he said. "I thought that was you. Academic Decathlon Nationals, 2009. You were the math judge." Round 3. "I brought the team from Clarksburg." Cole stopped walking. He turned to look at Lou with the expression of a man who had not heard that name, that version of himself spoken aloud in a very long time. "You scored my kids fair," Lou said. "Harder than the other judges, but fair. I respected that then, and I still do." Cole said nothing for a moment. Then he asked what Lou knew about Massey's exam. Lou's voice did not change. "I've seen the flagged section," he said. "The proofwriting portion. The committee marked it anomalous because Massey used an approach that doesn't appear in any standard curriculum. It's not in the textbooks they're working from, but it is completely correct, more than correct. It's the kind of solution that takes 3 lines instead of 8, because the student actually understood what the problem was asking, rather than executing a memorized procedure. The judges flagged it because they don't recognize it. But any working mathematician would recognize it in about 30 seconds, Cole said. So they flagged her for being right in a way they didn't expect. Lou said, "That's one way to put it. The accurate way, in my opinion." Cole asked why Lou hadn't said this in the meeting with Nora. Lou looked toward the door to the principal's office at the end of the hall. He was quiet for a moment, the way a man is quiet when he is deciding how much honesty the situation calls for. Then he said, "Gerald Fenn donated $480,000 to this school's library renovation last spring. His name is on the reading room. There is a plaque. I have 3 years until my pension is fully vested, and I am not a young man, and I made a calculation that I am not proud of." He paused. "But I'm telling you now, and I'm telling you because you are the only person who walked into that building today with the background to actually argue what I just told you, in a room full of people who have the power to do something about it. The committee's reasoning is wrong. It's demonstrably wrong to anyone who knows what they're looking at. But knowing it and being able to prove it to the right audience are 2 different things." He looked at Cole steadily. "You can do the second part. I can't. Not without putting myself in a position I can't afford." Cole held his gaze for a long moment. He understood what Lou was saying, and he understood what Lou was not saying, which was that he was on his own. That the one person in the building who knew the truth had already done the math on what speaking it publicly would cost him, and had decided that the cost was too high. Cole did not judge him for it. He had spent enough years in institutions to understand that kind of calculation. He had made one himself, 4 years ago, when he decided that the cost of standing in front of a classroom was too high and walked away. He thanked Lou. He walked to where Massey was waiting and collected her, and walked her out to the truck, and she got in without a word and looked out the window the whole drive home. The afternoon was gray and cold. The fields on either side of the highway were bare. Cole drove with both hands on the wheel and thought about everything he was going to have to do, and in what order, and how much time he had to do it. The 3 weeks began. Massey was suspended from the competition roster, pending the outcome of the review, which meant she could attend classes but could not represent the school in any academic event until the matter was resolved. The announcement was made to faculty by memo. Students heard about it the way students always hear about things in fragments, exaggerated and sharpened in the retelling. By the end of the first week, there were kids in the hallway who said cheater when Massey walked past, not loudly, not in a way that could be formally reported, just loud enough for her to hear. Just loud enough to be a fact she had to carry every morning when she walked through the front doors. She stopped eating in the cafeteria. She started taking her lunch to the library and eating at the small table near the back, behind the reference shelves. The librarian could see her perfectly well from the desk, and Massey probably knew that. But she sat there anyway, And the librarian understood that what the girl needed was the fiction of being unseen for 45 minutes a day, and so she let her have it. Cole noticed the changes in increments, the way you notice the temperature dropping in a room before you register that it's cold. The dinners grew quieter. Massie cleared her plate earlier than usual and went to the kitchen without being asked. She laughed at the television less. She said she was tired and went to her room before 9 on school nights, which was early even for her. He didn't push. He asked about her day in the ordinary way and listened to the ordinary answers and did not force her to talk about anything she wasn't ready to talk about. One night at 11:15 he was still reading in the living room when he heard the soft, regular click of a calculator from behind her closed door. Not a phone, not a tablet, the physical calculator he had bought her 2 Christmases ago, the one with the satisfying mechanical keys she had always liked. She was in there doing mathematics at 11 in the evening, not because any test required it, but because it was hers. Because no matter what happened in the hallways or in the cafeteria or in any meeting room in that building, the numbers were still right when she worked them. They could not take that from her, and she seemed to understand this, and so she sat in her room after 11 at night and worked problems no one had assigned her. He listened to the clicking from the living room and did not go to her door. Then he turned off his lamp and lay in the dark, thinking about the proof section he had memorized from the photocopy Massie had been allowed to keep, the one the committee had flagged. He had been turning it over in his mind every day since the first meeting, the way you turn over a piece of wood to check the grain before you cut it. He knew the argument he needed to make. He had known it since the hallway conversation with Lou. What he needed now was the right way to make it. On the Wednesday of the second week, Cole drove to the school in the afternoon without calling ahead. He was shown to Nora's office. He sat down across from her and set a document on her desk, 2 pages, handwritten on plain white paper. He had worked on it the night before at the kitchen table after midnight, writing by hand because the act of writing forced a precision that typing did not. The document walked through the flagged proof, step by step, reproduced from memory, with annotations in the margins, explaining the mathematical framework behind Massie's method. Naming 3 specific principles by their formal names, citing where each originated. Nora read it without looking up. When she finished, she sat quietly for a moment. "Where did you study mathematics, Mr. Whitaker?" she asked. Cole looked at the pages on her desk. He said, "I have a background in math education. That's all." Nora looked at him steadily. She did not press. She thanked him and said she would review it carefully. He picked up his jacket and left. That night, after the building had emptied and the parking lot outside was dark, Nora sat alone in her office with a cup of tea going cold on the corner of her desk and pulled up Massie Whitaker's complete academic file. Not the current year, only all of it. 6th grade, 7th, 8th, the first marking period of 9th. She went through every math exam, every quiz, every project that had been uploaded to the system. She had not done this before. She had looked at the current year record when the complaint arrived, the way the process required, and had seen nothing that answered the question on its own. Now she was looking at everything. What she found was not a student who had suddenly, inexplicably, performed at a level far above her history. What she found was a student who had been quietly doing something unusual for 3 years, consistently, and without apparent awareness that it was unusual. Massie's methods were idiosyncratic. She solved problems by routes that her teachers did not recognize, and more than once, a teacher had marked her wrong for using a non-standard approach, even when the answer was correct. The pattern was clear, and it ran all the way back to 6th grade. This was not the fingerprint of a student who had cheated once. This was the fingerprint of a student who thought in a particular way that most people around her had not noticed because they were looking for the expected approach and not finding it. Nora wrote 3 pages of notes on a legal pad. Then she followed a second thread. She looked into the background of Brandon Fenn's academic preparation. It took her nearly 2 hours of careful cross-referencing. Brandon had begun working with a private tutor from Nashville, approximately 6 months before the County Math Invitational. The tutor's name appeared on the website of a test preparation company, and in his staff biography he listed, among his professional connections, a consulting relationship with the County Academic Competition Office, the same office that oversaw the design of the invitational exam. A cached version of the page from 8 months earlier showed this clearly. The current version of the page had been updated. The consulting relationship was no longer mentioned. Nora wrote that down and underlined it. She did not know yet what it meant or whether it could be proven, but she wrote it down and underlined it because it was the kind of thing that, once noticed, could not be unnoticed. On Thursday evening she called Cole. She asked him directly, "Did you ever work as a teacher?" He was quiet long enough that she had her answer before he spoke. "Why did you leave?" she asked. His voice, when it came, was steady but different in texture from the voice he used in offices and across conference tables. He said, "My wife passed away. Her name was Rachel. She died 4 years ago. I couldn't stand in front of a classroom and pretend everything was fine when it wasn't fine. So I stopped." Nora did not say she was sorry. She had learned from her own particular losses that sorry was a word people reached for when they didn't know what else to offer, and that it rarely helped. She said, "I understand that." He said, "Do you?" She said, "I think so." Yeah. They stayed on the line without speaking for a moment. It was the first time either of them had held a shared silence without filling it, and both of them noticed it without saying so. When Nora set down the phone, she sat for a while longer at her desk, and the office around her was very quiet, and she thought about what it meant to stop doing the thing you were best at because the cost of continuing felt too high, and whether that was wisdom or surrender, and whether, sometimes, it was both at once. At the start of the 3rd week, Gerald Fenn delivered a second formal letter to the district office. Cole heard about it through Lou, who had a friend in the administration building. The letter did not simply maintain the original complaint. It escalated. Gerald was requesting that the results of the entire county math invitational be nullified and the competition re-administered under tighter proctoring conditions, citing what he called systemic procedural inadequacies in the original examination environment. The language was careful and bureaucratic and designed to sound reasonable. The effect, if the request was granted, would erase not just the accusation against Massey, but her score entirely, and with it her eligibility for the state competition that year. She could be cleared of wrongdoing and still lose everything she had earned. Cole read the message from Lou twice, sitting on the edge of a bathtub in a house outside town where he was replacing a subfloor. He set his phone down on the tile and sat for a moment thinking about the shape of what he was up against. Then he picked the phone back up, called Lou, and asked for everything Lou could find out about Denise Park. On the same day, Nora received a phone call from the district superintendent. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. He did not issue directives. He asked questions in the way people ask questions when they already know what answer they want. He noted that Gerald Fenn was an important community partner. He observed that resolutions satisfying multiple stakeholders tended to be more durable than those leaving grievances unaddressed. He said he trusted Nora's judgment and looked forward to a smooth outcome. He hung up. Nora sat at her desk for a long time after the call ended. She had taken this job because she believed in something specific, that the function of a school administrator, at its most fundamental, was to protect students from the kind of institutional cowardice that dressed itself up as pragmatism. She had articulated this belief clearly in her interview. The superintendent had called it inspiring. She was learning now, 8 months in, what inspiring was worth when the pragmatism was coming from someone with his name on the library reading room. She was still at her desk at 6:30 when she walked through the gym corridor on her way out. The overhead lights in the gym were on. Through the window in the gym door she could see Cole Whitaker on his knees near the far wall, his hand moving slowly along the edge of the new flooring he had been installing for several weeks. He had bid the contract months before any of this started. He was here because he had made a commitment, and Cole Whitaker completed what he started. She pushed the door open. He looked up. She told him about the second letter. She told him about the superintendent's call. She said she was beginning to understand that she was being managed, that the expectation was for her to find a way to make the Fenn family feel heard without actually ruling in Massey's favor, because a clear ruling created friction, and friction made the superintendent's job harder, and no one had asked Nora to come to Daler Creek to make the superintendent's job harder. Cole listened without moving. When she finished, he asked how many months were left before her contract came up for renewal. She said, 4. He nodded slowly. He pressed the heel of his hand along the seam between two planks, testing the fit. He did not say anything further, but he also did not stand up and reach for his tools. He stayed on the floor, and she stayed in the doorway, and the gym was quiet around them in the particular way that large empty rooms are quiet late in the evening, when everyone else has already gone home. The envelope arrived at Cole's door on a Friday morning, hand-delivered by Lou Harwick before school began. Inside was a single folded sheet of notebook paper covered in small, tidy handwriting. It was the personal field notes of a woman named Denise Park, who had proctored the examination room where Massey had sat on the day of the County Math Invitational. Denise had been proctoring academic competitions for 19 years before retiring 2 months after the Invitational, a retirement she had been planning for some time, and that had nothing to do with any of this. She was the kind of person who took notes on things that struck her as worth noting, whether or not anyone had asked. In her notes, written the evening after the exam, she had recorded an observation about one student identified by seat number, not name, who had completed the examination without using scratch paper. Denise had placed standard scratch packets at every desk before the students arrived. Every other student in the room had used theirs. This one had not. She worked in the designated answer spaces only, in very small, precise notations, solving the problems with almost no visible intermediate steps. Denise had watched her because she was curious. She had watched because in 19 years of sitting at the front of exam rooms, she had seen only one other student work that way, and that student had gone on to a mathematics scholarship at Vanderbilt. She had written it down because it seemed worth noting. She had never been asked about it. She had not known, until Lou reached her through a mutual friend from the County Teachers Association, that her notes were relevant to anything. Cole drove to Denise Park's house that same morning. She lived 20 minutes outside of town, in a pale yellow ranch house, with a bird bath in the front yard. She was 67, precise in her manner, and entirely unrattled once Cole had explained the situation. She said she had always thought it odd that no one from the review committee had contacted her. She said she was happy to sign a statement. Cole's neighbor on his street was a notary, and had been for 12 years, and Denise Park's signature was witnessed and notarized by 3 o'clock that afternoon. Cole walked into Nora's office the next morning, without a prior appointment, and placed the document on her desk. She read it. When she looked up, her expression was not surprise. It was recognition, the look of someone whose instinct has just been confirmed by something solid enough to use. She said, "You did all of this yourself?" He said, "Macy doesn't have anyone else." Nora set the document down. She thought about the superintendent's call. She thought about the 4 months remaining on her contract. She thought about why she had driven down from Nashville 8 months ago with that leather portfolio, and what the answer to that question required of her now. She said, "I'm going to bring this to the Independent Academic Review Board, not the district office, the board itself." Cole looked at her. She said, "They have independent authority. The superintendent can advise them, but cannot override their rulings. Taking this route means going around the district office, and there are professional consequences for that." He said, "I know." She said, "I'm going to do it anyway." He looked at her for a moment. He was not a man who gave his trust easily or quickly, and he was not a man who said things he did not mean. What he said, after a brief pause, was, "Thank you, Dr. Ellison." She said, "Don't thank me yet. Let's see what the board does." The hearing was held on a Thursday morning in the conference room of the district administrative building, large enough by regulation to accommodate observers. Gerald Fenn arrived at 8:50 with an attorney who carried a slim briefcase and introduced himself to no one. Cole Whitaker arrived at 9:01 in a flannel shirt, with a faint stain near the left cuff from a job the previous afternoon. He sat 3 rows back on the left side of the room and placed his manila folder on the chair beside him. Nora sat on the right side of the room near the wall. She had told Cole she would be here as a formal observer. Not an advocate, her administrative role required her to remain neutral in the proceedings. What she had not said, and what he had understood, was that she had already made her choice. She had brought the case to this board. The choice that mattered had already been made. The board had 5 members, none from Daler Creek. The chair was a retired district administrator from Murfreesboro named Harold Webb, with a reputation for running hearings without theatrics and tolerating very little he could not directly use. The other 4 included a school board attorney, a state education policy officer, a retired high school principal, and Dr. Priya Singh, who held a chair in applied mathematics at a state university and had served on academic competition review panels for over a decade. Gerald's lawyer spoke first and at length. He cited inconsistencies in the original proctoring documentation, questioned the statistical methodology of the anomaly designation, and argued that a student with no established track record of high performance at this level could not credibly be said to have produced such work independently. The presentation was professional and thorough and built its case on the absence of explanation rather than the presence of evidence. Harold Webb said, "Thank you. Mr. Whitaker, you've been allotted 5 minutes as a parent representative." Cole stood and walked to the front table. He set down 3 documents and named them without preamble. The first was the handwritten mathematical analysis. He had recopied it cleanly from his draft, 3 pages now. He walked through the proof. The method Massey had used, the framework it drew from, why it was unconventional relative to the 9th grade curriculum, why it was nonetheless mathematically correct, and why the approach was characteristic of original thinking rather than imitation. He moved at the pace of someone for whom this material had become natural, neither rushed nor performed. He did not simplify what did not need simplifying. The second document was the notarized statement from Denise Park. The third was a letter from the Academic Decathlon National Committee on official letterhead, confirming that Cole Whitaker had served as a certified national mathematics judge for 3 consecutive championship years, from 2007 through 2009, with a commendation noted in his final year. The room was very quiet. Cole folded his hands on the table. He said, "The method my daughter used is not in the standard curriculum." That is true. It is also not in any textbook a student would find if she were searching for a shortcut to copy. It comes from a branch of proof theory that most students do not encounter before college. What the committee flagged as suspicious is the opposite of what it appears to be. It is the mark of someone who understood the problem well enough to solve it her own way. I have spent years around students who think this way. They are not common. My daughter is one of them. Dr. Singh leaned forward and asked 2 precise technical questions about the proof-theoretic framework Cole had cited. He answered both without hesitation. She wrote on her notepad and underlined what she had written. Gerald Fenn stood and began to speak. Harold Webb raised one hand and said, without raising his voice, that Mr. Fenn would have the opportunity to file a written response within 10 days. He would not be speaking in this session. A board member near the end of the table, the policy officer, then asked, in an entirely neutral tone, whether the record contained any documentation of academic preparation undertaken by other competitors in the months preceding the invitational. Gerald Fenn's face changed. The color went out of it in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. His attorney touched his sleeve. The question was noted for the record. The board recessed for 40 minutes. Cole sat in the hallway on a plastic chair with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. He had done everything he knew how to do, and he had done it as carefully as he could, and now there was nothing left but waiting. Waiting had always been the hardest part for him. Rachel had been the one who could sit with uncertainty without it eating her alive. He had learned a great many things in 4 years of doing this alone, but he had not learned that. He did not hear the conference room door open. He heard Nora's footsteps when she was close enough that he raised his head before she spoke. She sat down beside him and said, "They recognized Macy's score. Full reinstatement. The complaint has been dismissed. She has her spot at the state competition." Cole raised his head. His eyes were red at the edges. He did not smile or speak immediately. He looked at the far end of the hallway for a moment with the expression of a man who had been braced for impact for so long that its absence felt unfamiliar, like stepping off a boat onto ground that refuses to move. Nora watched him. She had understood, in the abstract, that he was carrying a great deal. She had not understood, until she sat beside him in that hallway, the specific weight of what it meant to fight alone for someone who is entirely dependent on you to gather evidence alone and argue alone, and then sit in a hallway alone, not knowing whether it was enough. She had not been alone in this. Cole had been alone in it. He said, quietly, "Thank you." She said, "You did it." "I just pointed the door." He looked at her. She held his gaze. Neither of them moved for a moment. Down the hall, through the glass wall of the conference room, Brandon Fenn was sitting in a chair where he had been waiting for his father for the better part of 2 hours. He was 15 years old, and he had heard everything: the testimony, the board's questions, and most importantly, the question about his tutor. Spoken neutrally, and noted for the official record, Brandon sat with his hands on his knees and stared at the floor with the expression of a boy who had just understood something about the adults around him that he would have preferred not to understand, that his father had built him an advantage, that the advantage had been concealed, that the question of what he had actually earned, without it, was one he was going to have to live with for a long time. No formal accusations were made in that conference room that day. No investigation was announced. But the question was now part of the official record of the proceeding, in black and white, and on file. Some consequences do not arrive loudly. They arrive the way Brandon sat in that hallway, quietly and heavily, and without any clear end in sight. Some reckonings are not legal. They are the kind that a person carries inside, that accumulate over time, and become part of how they understand themselves and the world they were raised in. Gerald Fenn would hire lawyers and write responses and argue procedure. Brandon Fenn would remember what he heard through that glass wall for the rest of his life. Cole and Nora sat in the hallway a little longer, not talking. Then Cole stood and gathered his folder and said he needed to call Macy and tell her. Nora said yes, go. He walked toward the exit, and she watched him go, and the afternoon light was coming through the glass front doors at the end of the corridor, and he walked into it and disappeared, and she sat alone in the hallway for a moment before she stood and followed. 3 weeks later, Cole drove Macy to Nashville for the state math competition. They left Daler Creek at 6 in the morning when the town was still gray and the fields on either side of the highway still had frost on them. For the first hour, they did not speak. The radio played a country station, and then a sports talk program, and then more country. Around Cookville, Macy reached into the bag at her feet and pulled out a sleeve of crackers and held it toward him without looking away from the window, and he took some without taking his eyes off the road. And she ate some too, and that was their breakfast. The testing facility was a high school in East Nashville, bigger than Daler Creek High by a factor of several times. Macy walked into the registration area with her ID and her number tag. She signed her name on the check-in sheet without pausing. She adjusted the straps of her backpack and walked through the door to the testing wing without looking back. Cole stood in the lobby and watched the door close behind her. He sat in the lobby for 3 hours. He read a section of a paperback he had brought and did not retain much of what he read. He drank 2 cups of coffee from the hospitality table near the registration desk. He thought about Rachel sometimes in waiting rooms, because Rachel had been good at waiting, and thinking about her in that context was easier than thinking about her in other contexts, which was progress of a sort. Macy placed 4th in the state, out of 237 competitors. On the drive home, she was quiet for a long time, watching the fields go by in the last of the afternoon light. The sky had gone orange at the edges, and the temperature was dropping, and the heater in the truck was doing its best. After a while, she said, "Dad, I don't care about the placement anymore." He said, "Yeah." She said, "I just wanted to prove I didn't cheat." He said, "You proved it." She said, "I know." They were quiet again. The road ran long and straight through the flat middle part of the state, and he reached over and turned the radio down without thinking, and she didn't turn it back up. They drove the last 40 minutes in the comfortable kind of quiet that has nothing to explain itself. That night, after Macy was in bed, Cole's phone lit up on the kitchen counter. A text from Nora. How did she do? He wrote back. 4th. She's okay. A minute passed. His phone lit up again. And you? He looked at that question for a while. He typed. Better than yesterday. He set the phone down and stood at the kitchen window. The street was dark, and the neighbor's porch light was on across the road, and it occurred to him not for the first time, but with more clarity than it had come before, that he had been very tired for a very long time, and that something in the last few weeks had shifted in him in a way he couldn't fully name. Not healed, not fixed, just less alone in the specific way he had been alone since Rachel died. He didn't analyze it further. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. 6 weeks after the hearing, Cole finished the gym floor. The last section was a long run along the east wall, tight against the baseboard, and he had saved it for last because it required patience and a very precise hand. He packed his tools into their cases in the late afternoon, the gym full of low golden light coming through the high windows, the whole room smelling of new wood and the particular mineral scent of the stain he had used. He was latching the last case when the gym door swung open and Nora walked in. She was still in her work clothes, the dark blazer, the narrow flats she wore on days she had administrative meetings. She walked a few steps in and stopped and looked at the floor. She said, "It's beautiful." He said, "It'll hold up better than the old one." The old surface had too much flex in the center. She walked to the middle of the room and turned slowly, taking in the full length of it. He watched her from near the door, one hand resting on the handle of the equipment case. After a moment she said, "Cole, have you ever thought about going back to teaching?" He stood up straight. He looked at the floor he had just finished. He thought about the classroom he used to have at a school in Clarksburg, before Rachel got sick, before the years that came after. He thought about what it had felt like to stand in front of a room full of students who were confused about something, and to watch the specific moment when they stopped being confused, the particular satisfaction of that, which was different from any other satisfaction he had found since. He said, "I don't know. Some things. Maybe you're not supposed to go back to," she said. "And some things. Maybe you're already ready for. You just haven't decided to admit it yet." He looked at her. She was standing in the middle of his floor, with the late light catching the grain of the wood around her feet, and she was looking at him in the particular way that a person looks at someone when they are saying something they have considered for a while, and mean entirely. He didn't answer. But he didn't look away either. The gym door opened again, and Massey came in from the cold, backpack on, cheeks red, looking for her father. She saw Nora, and stopped. She said, "Oh. Hi, Dr. Ellison." Nora smiled. "Hi, Macy." Macy looked at her father, then back at Nora. Then at her father again. She was 14 and had been paying close attention to adults her whole life, and she understood more than she was going to say out loud about what she was standing in the middle of. Nora said, "You handled everything with a lot of integrity. Through all of it. I hope you know that." Macy looked at her directly, not ducking her head the way she used to, not looking away or deflecting the way she had always done when someone said something kind directly to her face. She said, "Thank you for believing me when it wasn't the easy thing to do." Nora held her gaze. She let the words sit there for a moment without covering them. Cole looked at his daughter. He looked at Nora. The three of them stood in the gym with the smell of new wood around them, and the late afternoon light making long rectangles across the floor he had laid, and there was no tidy resolution, no moment that announced itself as an ending, just a room that smelled like something built to last, and three people in it who understood, without saying so, that something was beginning.